I have been in this country for 40 years, and I have built exactly one thing I am truly proud of. Not the business, not the truck, the house on Fernwood Crescent in Grimby, Ontario with the blue shutters my wife picked in 2003 and the porch steps I poured myself on a Saturday afternoon, and I came home one Thursday evening in October to find my wife standing at the gate with one bag. Welcome back to Eric's Revenge Stories. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You are going to love it here. My name is Roland Buchamp. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil contractor in the Niagara region before I retired. And if you want to understand who I am as a person, I will tell you that on my last day of work, my crew threw me a party. And I spent most of it worrying about whether there was enough food. I show up early. I stay until the work is done. And when I leave a job, I leave it better than I found it. Before I tell you what I did next, tell me where you are watching this from. I would genuinely love to know. Life on Fernwood Crescent was the kind of quiet that takes 30 years to earn. My wife Sandra and I had been married for 36 years. She taught elementary school and retired the spring before I did, which meant for the first time in our adult lives, we were both just home together. No schedules, no alarms, no obligations. Sandra is the kind of woman who can silence a room with one look and 5 minutes later have that same room laughing until their eyes water. She has opinions about bird feeders that I would describe as fierce and extensive. Do not get her started on suet cakes unless you have 40 minutes and know where to be. We have one son. His name is Derek. He is 38 years old, lives in Hamilton with his partner Joel, and works in real estate. He is smart. He knows how things work. More importantly, he knows how to make things sound like they work a certain way even when they do not. That quality served him well in his career. It is also the quality that put him on the wrong side of me. The questions started the summer before. Derek began asking about the house. Casual questions, conversational. He asked once what we thought the place would appraise at in the current market. I said I had no idea because I was not selling. He nodded in a way that suggested he had already made a calculation I was not aware of. At a barbecue in August, Joelle mentioned, "It must be hard to maintain a property this size at our age." I said, "I poured the front steps myself, and they are straighter than most things I have ever seen come out of a contractor's yard." She smiled. She moved on. I noticed in September, Derek called 3 times in 1 week, asking what I wanted to do with the property long term. I told him the long-term plan was to continue living in it because that is where Sandra and I lived. He said, "Of course, absolutely. Just asking from a planning perspective." I said the planning perspective was that we planned to stay. Then he called again Thursday. Sandra mentioned once that Derek had asked her while I was at the hardware store whether she had ever spoken to a lawyer about her name on the deed. Sandra had told him that was between her and me and offered him a cookie. She mentioned it to me the way she mentions things that concern her lightly with a side note, so I know she is processing it. I told her the house was in my name alone and always had been. She said she would have another cookie. I said, "Good idea." The Thursday in October, I had been in St. Catharines helping my old foreman Frank Dooley move equipment on his property. Frank is 71 and refuses to hire anyone for anything because no one does it right. He is usually correct. I drove home around 6, feeling the specific satisfaction of a man who has done something useful with his hands. I turned on to Fernwood Crescent, and I saw Sandra standing at the gate. Not in the garden, not on the porch. At the gate. She had one bag beside her, a canvas tote she uses for groceries. I pulled in, got out of the truck, and looked at her face. She said, "Roland." Derek was here, he and Joelle. They were here for 2 hours. She told me what happened. Derek had arrived in the early afternoon with documents. Not real documents as I would discover, but papers that looked official enough to frighten someone who trusted her own son. He told Sandra the house had been transferred to his name as part of a long-term estate agreement. He told her a lawyer had confirmed it. He said the kindest thing for everyone was if she took what she needed and stayed somewhere else until things were sorted. He said he did not want to make it unpleasant. Sandra had stood in her own kitchen while her son told her to leave her home. I picked up the bag. I took her hand. I walked her inside and sat her down at the kitchen table. I got her a glass of water and a piece of lemon cake. Then I went to the hall closet and called Margaret Voss. Margaret Voss is my lawyer. She has been my lawyer for 11 years. She is 52 years old, and she has a voice like a judge. She answered on the second ring. I told her what happened. I did not embellish. She was quiet for 4 seconds. Then she said, "The title of that property is in your name alone, has been since you bought it and has not changed." She said no one would have touched that document without her knowing. She said what Derek showed Sandra was not a legal transfer, and she would put her career on that. I said, "What do we do?" She said, "You do nothing tonight." I do everything tonight. By morning, your son will have a formal trespass notice served to him at his Hamilton address. She paused and said, "Roland, he walked into your house and told your wife to leave. I want you to know I am taking this personally on your behalf." I said, "I appreciate that, Margaret." She said, "Get some rest." I called my friend Terrence Bull 40 minutes later. Terrence and I have been close for 29 years. We worked together in the early 90s, and we have not gone more than 2 weeks without talking since. He answered before the second ring. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he told Sandra to leave the house, his own mother, with one bag. I said yes. He said, "Roland." I said, "I know." He said, "You doing okay?" I said, "I am doing better than Derek is going to be in the morning." Terrence made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close. He said, "Margaret is terrifying." I said, "That is exactly the idea." He said, "You are not going to sleep tonight." I said, "I slept fine." He said, "You absolutely did not sleep fine." He was correct. Not even close. If you have made it this far, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people watch without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you genuinely. By 7:30 Friday morning, Margaret had sent me the draft letter. By 8:15, the trespass notice had been served. I was drinking coffee in the kitchen when the confirmation came through. Derek called at 8:42. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 8:51. I answered. He said, "Dad, I just got served with a trespass notice. What is going on?" I said, "Derek, I am going to say something and I want you to hear it clearly. Your mother was standing at the gate of her own home with one grocery bag because you told her to leave. Sit with that for a moment before we continue. You." He started to talk about planning, about the future, about trying to help us think ahead. I said, "Derek, Margaret reviewed the title last night. The house is mine. It has always been mine. There is no transfer. There is no agreement. There is no document that means what you told your mother it meant. Do you understand what I am saying to you?" He was quiet. I said, "You walked into my home and you frightened your mother into packing a bag. Whatever you were hoping would happen when I came home did not happen. And now here is what is going to happen instead. You are not welcome at this property. That is what the notice means. Sandra and I will decide in the coming weeks whether we want any further conversation with you." I would not hold your breath. He said, "Dad, I was just trying to be practical." I said, "Derek, the future of this property is my business. You made a very significant error in judgment about what your mother would tolerate. She is considerably less forgiving than I am, and you already know how forgiving I am not. I want you to think carefully about what that means." I ended the call. The following Monday, I reviewed my will with Margaret. Derek's name was removed from the estate. I asked how long it would take. She said she already had the revised draft prepared. She had thought I might be coming in that week. I told her she was a remarkable woman. She said she knew. Sandra found out over dinner that evening. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That is your decision to make, Roland." I said, "It is." She said, "He scared me in my own kitchen." I said, "I know." She said, "I kept thinking you would walk in any minute." I said, "I am sorry I was not there sooner." She put her hand on mine and said, "You got there. That is what you always do." Terrence came by on the Saturday. The three of us sat on the back porch until the temperature dropped and moved inside. He brought a coffee cake he claimed his daughter had made and which he had absolutely made himself. When Sandra said it was delicious, he looked like a man receiving an award. At one point, Sandra went to refill the kettle and Terrence leaned over and said, "How are you actually doing?" I looked at the yard. The maple in the back corner had dropped most of its leaves. They were gathered against the fence the way they always do in October. Sandra had been asking me to rake them for 4 days. I said, "I am going to rake those leaves tomorrow." Terrence said, "That is not what I asked." I said, "I know. I am fine. More fine than I expected to be." He nodded. Sandra came back out and topped off all 3 cups and looked at Terrence and said, "You made this cake yourself and we all know it." He said it was a collaborative effort. She said, "That means yes." He said, "It means yes." She sat down and picked up her cup. She looked entirely at home. She looked like someone who had never packed a bag in her life. That is exactly how I like.